there's that Tumblr feed thing where you're looking at a bunch of images and liking all of them, but you're looking at all of them without any context, and each image is sort of given the same weight. So there'll be like a series of drawings by a Japanese artist who's been dead for 80 years, and it's sort of sandwiched between like a post about the gender politics of Supernatural and like a, I don't know, like a Guardians of the Galaxy reaction GIF, and it's sort of weird to take in art that way. I grew up in Ottawa and I live in Toronto. I came to Toronto to study philosophy, but I dropped out, and yeah, I've been drawing for a while, but I never was formally trained. I was just interested in it. I was specifically interested in studying aesthetics, and there were a few writers who wrote, I guess, about that subject matter that I was interested in at the time. But I wasn't a very good student, so I very gracelessly left college. I'm sure it did. It's hard to think of like direct examples, but like every experience informs my artwork, and like it was. I was really engaged with what I was reading, despite not being a very good student or focused student. So yeah, I think it certainly influenced the way I approach art, and yeah, I'm sure just in a lot of big and small ways has changed the way I approach art. There's a really nice comics community here. The Beguiling is here, which is my favorite comic book store, and it was one that I would visit when I was in high school, when I was on trips to Toronto, and they've been very supportive of me. And a lot of my friends and collaborators live here. My publisher lives here, so I feel pretty lucky to be in the city I am. Like Koyama Press is here, Patrick Kyle is here, who I've done a lot of work with, and I'm in a band with. Yeah. Yeah, we've done a bunch of projects together. I think I couldn't name when. I just think we'd see each other around at like at either TCAF or other zine or poster shows. Yeah, I became aware of the work that he was doing in a collective he's in, or they're not as together anymore, but they're three friends, Chris Kuzma, Jeanette Latom, and Patrick Kyle, and they did work as Wowie together for a number of years, and edited some anthologies that I was included in. I've been reading comics all my life and wanting to do comics all my life. I started taking it more seriously about 6 years ago when I started a number of projects that ended up resulting in what became the first issue of a series I draw called Loose. But yeah, comics were like how I learned to read. My parents had a lot of Peanuts and Bloom County, Calvin and Hobbes, and The Far Side lying around the house, and those were sort of the first things I was reading. I wanted to go to a lot of concerts in Ottawa, but I had no money, and I also didn't have a fake ID, so I would just bother promoters to let me do posters in exchange for getting to see shows for free. But yeah, it ended up being like I think I learned a lot about design and drawing just by doing a lot of those. I started looking at the posters by a group from Montreal called Seripop, and I remember sending them a really dorky email, just sort of asking them like, well, you know, I haven't really seen any work that looks like this before. Could you just like tell me what cool shit I should be into? And they really generously like wrote back a list of people who they thought I might like, and it was a list that kind of became like a weird Rosetta Stone for a lot of the artwork that I'm into now. They recommended me comics from High Water Books and artists who are working in Fort Thunder, and they recommended me a book on Cuban poster art, Art Chantry's posters. They just gave me like this really amazing list of things. Gary Panter, yeah. I think it was a pretty organic process. I would just listen to the band and then kind of just draw as I listened to it, and whatever sketches seemed most appropriate, I would sort of throw on a poster. Gig posters are like at the level I was drawing them at, just for like really small shows, especially at the time. It was pretty low stakes, and you could kind of get away with a lot of things because even if you sort of screwed it up, it was only like silk screened in a run of 50 or 100 and would only be up for like 3 weeks, and then everyone would forget about it. It's sort of a weird thing to describe, as a lot of my friends are cartoonists, but it's not like when I hang out with them I think like I'm hanging out with members of the Toronto comics community. Like, but I think it's fairly exciting right now. There are, or even just outside of comics specifically, there's a lot of really interesting small press stuff happening. A friend of mine edits for a publisher called Parish Press, and they've been putting out interesting work. And there's a show next week actually called Zine Dream that Jesjeet Gill runs, and he publishes as color code printing as well. And yeah, they put out just a lot of excellent work. It feels just there's a lot of people putting out excellent work on a very small scale, which I like a lot. It's become sort of a weird fixture, not just in Toronto, but I think in comics in general. It's hard to think of many shows like it, at least in North America, and a lot of the shows that have started since have a lot of the small press or independent comics focused shows, I guess, I think have used TCAF as their model, or a model. So yeah, I mean, it's been a huge impact on me personally, and talking to other artists. It seems to be a thing that cartoonists really rally around each year. I've been going there for a while, and I missed the first few shows when they were just like outdoors on outside of Honest Ed's. But I think I've been it's been pretty amazing to see how huge it's grown since I think the first one I went to was still. They rented out one of the buildings at the U of T campus a few years ago, and it's maybe tripled in size since then. Oh, sure. A lot of friends I've met through either TCAF or going to other shows. Like there's one in Brooklyn, Comics Arts Brooklyn, and one in Chicago called Cake. I like a lot. I met and Koyama at TCAF, who runs Koyama Press, and I also met Tom Devlin and Chris Oliveros from John and Quarterly at TCAF. So, like, my two sort of biggest professional relationships were formed through running into people at that show. She came up to me, I was sort of aware of some of the books she'd published, but I was just walking around TCAF and she came up to me and said, "Oh, you're Michael DeForge." Like, maybe she knew me through Facebook or something I had at the time, and she introduced herself to me and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." At the time I had only been self-publishing things, but I was working on Lose Number 1. I was maybe halfway through the issue. And I had saved up a lot of money pulling double shifts at my job, dishwashing at the time, so I could publish it myself. But I sort of thought, well, if I maybe could get interest in someone else publishing it, I could use the money I saved up to take another month off and draw issue 2. And I showed it to Anne, and she was into it enough to take a chance on it, and that's sort of what happened. I was able to work on issue 2 instead of blowing all my money publishing it. I guess all my eggs are in this basket, and they have been for a while, so it doesn't ever seem like a difficult choice to make. It's like, I mean, there's certainly like web publishing is an option, but I really like the way things look printed. So for me, it's not done until it's printed, and a lot of the times that means doing it yourself, because not everybody is gonna, especially starting out, not everyone's gonna take a risk on your weird like flight of fancy or whatever. But I feel really lucky that comics are like my particular interest, because I feel like most other mediums, it's a lot more expensive to put things out on your own, or at least not as easy to put things out on your own. I get the impression in the fine art and literary world that there's a lot more gatekeepers, and with literature, I get the impression there's more of a stigma about self-publishing, or about it being considered sort of like a vanity projects. And it's certainly much cheaper than like working on a movie, or I often think like I can Xerox or risograph the entire run of a mini comic, and that costs me as much as it costs to like rent 4 hours of rehearsal time, play with my band. And so I'm happy that I'm more in the one than the other, I guess. I have a reference file full of color palettes that I've been sort of saving to use for something, and also palettes that I want to rip off that I've taken either from online sources or scanned. I've been moving back into doing full color comics again. I stopped for a while after Ant Colony. Ant Colony was a serial I did that's been collected in book form, but when I was doing it, I made sure every week that I had a different color palette to force myself not to use I felt like I was using the same colors all the time before, so I thought this would be like a good way to force myself to do something different every week. But then after that, I sort of retreated to black and white for a while, and now I'm kind of figuring out how I want my color comics to look now. And so far it's very saturated and neon looking this year. It kind of just sort of spiraled into a bigger thing. I knew, I've been corresponding with Simon for a little bit, and I got to meet him finally when he came to last year's Comics Art Fest in Brooklyn. But I knew he'd have a book out around the same time I'd have a book out, and I thought, oh, if you happen to be in North America, maybe we can do a few days together, and it'll be like maybe a week, just East Coast, easy stuff. And then I found out Patrick had something out, and he thought, oh, we'll do it with Patrick. And then it sort of just became this thing where suddenly it became a whole month's worth of dates. So I was a little freaked out, like, oh, this is now a whole thing. But yeah, it should be fun. I hope it's fun. It'll be the longest I've been on the road for. So. Thankfully, in the book tour I've done before and the forthcoming one, I haven't had to book much myself. So publishers and publicists who are much better at that stuff than we are arranged all that for me. It's a weird thing. Like I enjoy it. But it's strange because it's busy, but you don't feel like you're doing work because it's not really your work. It's like related to your work. So yeah, I like doing it, but then I always feel guilty because I'm not drawing. But it's cool, you know. It's like meeting people in different cities or visiting a bunch of friends in different cities. Like, of course, is a fun thing. And if people actually show up, and I've been lucky enough that on the last tour people came by. It's nice that nice to see like, oh, I actually have readers, and it's hard to tell when you're just in a basement working all day that that's the case. I knew a bunch of people who were on the show just through comics, because so many of the artists on the show draw comics as well. And they initially asked me if I wanted to do a storyboard test, and I was like, yeah, sure. I have no training in animation, and like at the time I still barely do. I didn't know to draw a storyboard, but then I asked them if I do happen to get the job, would I have to move to LA? And they said yes, and I couldn't move to LA at the time. Then a little while after, they got me to do a design test anyway, because they needed a new designer. And then long story short, the design position I ended up filling doesn't have enough responsibility that they require me to be there. So I sort of lucked out, and I get to live here designing for LA. I mean, it's pretty great for me. Yeah, they just send me a list of things to draw every week, and then every few days I send them a new package of stuff, and they send me revisions. It's yeah, like there are times when the deadlines are much harsher and are more like, we need this in the hour. But yeah, it's like a lot of work, but I am generally able to keep up with it. And I've only ever worked alone. I've never drawn in a studio or shared a studio with anyone. So it's pretty ideal circumstances for me. But yeah, that I still get to be in my room all day. Yeah, I love the show. Yeah, it felt crazy to be asked, because yeah, again, like I had no training, and I didn't even like think of it as an option, as something I could try out for. Like, just yeah. And when I started on the show, I had a really steep learning curve, because I had no idea what I was doing, or like even when I got the job, my first week on the job, I wasn't even clear what my responsibilities were or what I was supposed to do. I think like that was all Penn, because his background and his interests are mini comics, and I think how it was happening at the time was when they were hiring people for the show, a lot of people from animation were applying, and you know, it's a tough thing who you want to work with and collaborate with, and he, I guess, just wasn't finding everybody or finding enough people that he thought would mesh well, so he was like, well, why don't I look at these from like outside sources? And I think it's cool in the show. It's like a very forgiving show in that it can incorporate a lot of different aesthetics and tones. So it makes a lot of sense that there's people who have really different and idiosyncratic sensibilities contributing to it. Yeah, like I think Jesse Moynihan was the first hire of theirs who had no background in animation, had to learn on the job. But he's now one of like the most dominant voices and influences on the show, which is awesome. It's both. It's sort of funny because it's like, I get to see all the work and I get sent storyboards all the time, but I don't really interact with many of the artists on the show unless I see them in person, like visiting LA. So it's sort of, I feel like the weird removed, like, yeah, because I don't end up seeing any of the day-to-day stuff in the office. But it can be pretty intimidating to get a storyboard from Steve Wolfhard or Tom Herpick or Jesse every month and just look at them and think like, this is so much better than anything I could draw. Especially during stretches when I've been working on storyboards myself, seeing some of the art come in. And my current boss, the head designer, Matt Forsyth, and Adam Muto, who I guess is Matt's boss, getting their corrections and revisions on my notes is always a really humbling process, because they're just much more efficient and elegant cartoonists than I am. But I've learned a lot from working with them because of that, because they're so much better at it than I am. Well, everything I do, I have with print in mind eventually. I design all my comics to be held and all my pages to sort of work as spreads. And I have a hard time focusing on the screen myself. There aren't many webcomics I keep up with on a regular basis. A lot of them I wait for print collection. So that's just how my preference is for my own work to be displayed. But I also recognize that putting stuff online is like the most efficient way of getting work out there to a lot of people. Like it used to be cheapest to just print a run of zines and like throw them in people's faces. And now that's still cheap, but not the cheapest thing, and the web is the cheapest thing. So yeah, I'm happy to do both. And I realize that I have some readers who prefer my work online over my work in print. When Ant Colony came out, not a lot of people, but a few people said they actually did prefer reading it digitally rather than owning the book, which is fine. It makes sense that some people would have that preference. So. I think I started that maybe 2 or 3 months after I finished Ant Colony. So part of it was just like I finished one weekly comic, and I thought, well, I should do another. And I also wanted to do something that was fairly different in look and tone from Ant Colony. So a lot of both the way I approach the drawing and the format and the colors and the sorts of characters I'm writing feel different than Ant Colony. I don't. Maybe someone reading it is just like, oh, it's the same old stuff he always writes about. Yeah, I wanted to break away from tone. It started out, I sort of envisioned it originally as like a young adult comic or something, like a YA audience in mind, but I feel like there is nothing at all appealing about it too. Like looking at it now, I'm like, I don't know why I thought that would be, it sort of morphed into its own thing, and I'm like, no 14-year-old is going to be like super thrilled about the adventures of this like cranky woman, but yeah. No, I tend to do it like the day before I post it is when I do it. Yeah, it can be tough to manage everything, and I sort of recognize that in a few years I probably will have a harder time managing everything. Like I know I'm not going to get faster at working. Like I hit my peak and past my peak of like how long I can stay awake for. So I'm trying to take advantage of the fact that I can both manage commercial work and my personal work at the same time. And recognizing that I'll have to renegotiate sometime down the road, whenever that is. No, I improvise all my comics. So like I start I do it all a page at a time. So the morning I'll sort of thumbnail out the page I'm going to spend the rest of the day drawing. So I guess I'll sometimes have like some loose idea of like what a character's arc might be or where I want some things to end up. For Ant Colony, there were big events in the book that I knew I wanted to get to, the magnifying glass. Maybe that's a spoiler. There's a thing with the magnifying glass. And I knew like I wanted to hit that, and like I knew like I wanted this character to reach this conclusion and so on. But I try not to have a good map on how I'll get there, and if it deviates from that, I try to have the attitude that it's deviated or digressed for a good reason. If I'm sort of hitting a brick wall, I'm not someone who's good at taking a break from it and like coming back to it. I usually just like keep working, knowing that I'll have to throw out a lot of the work, the garbage work that's getting made during that stretch, until something sort of interesting or new comes out. If I take too long of a break, I feel like I forget like how to even write a comic. I lose that muscle memory or something and have to relearn it. So I'm really I do a lot of work that I end up throwing out, and I think that's sort of how I deal with a block. If I start getting repetitive, I just like force myself to keep pushing on until I break through it. I like to think of it as always in development. As I'm not super sure how comfortable that I am currently, but I try to each new project I try to have like sort of a different look, or make sure I'm pushing myself in a certain way and taking my cartooning somewhere that I haven't really taken it before. I think once I decided that, or once I realized I shouldn't worry too much about what my style is or what my aesthetic is, it probably started forming like as soon as I made a decision to stop being so conscious of it. Now, my friend Patrick Kyle, Lale Westwind I like a lot, Lala Albert, Michaela Zakili, Jillian Tamaki, Sari Pop, like I said. Off the top of my head, those are a bunch. Yeah. Mark Bell, who did a comic called Shrimpy and Paul, was a big influence on me. Gilbert Hernandez's work, both Hernandez brothers. Gilbert, in particular, sort of was like a right place, right time moment for me when I saw his work. Dan Clowes, those were big cartoonists for me. I guess the internet keeps changing, so it's hard to say. Like right now, it seems really exciting. I got rid of my Tumblr for a bunch of reasons, but like it seems cool that people are able to blow up really easily on Tumblr. Like I look at the success Simon Hanselmann's had, and it's pretty awesome that like before he even like went to a comic convention, he was able to break into this scene that is largely North America based, I guess, despite him living in a different continent. So yeah, it seems like an exciting time right now. There's certainly weird stuff about like there's that Tumblr feed thing where you're looking at a bunch of images and liking all of them, but you're looking at all of them without any context, and each image is sort of given the same weight. So there'll be like a series of drawings by a Japanese artist who's been dead for 80 years, and it's sort of sandwiched between like a post about the gender politics of Supernatural and like like a Guardians of the Galaxy reaction GIF, and it's sort of weird to take in art that way, but it's it just also but it's hard to say, like that's just the way it is right now, and that's the pace of things. And I imagine it'll either speed up or slow down in 5 years, just the same way like the internet I grew up on 5 years ago is like a little different. So, like LiveJournal was different than Tumblr. It wasn't better or worse, maybe. It was just some other thing. It's fun, like I'm always interested in different mediums, but it feels like I'm not even good at the mediums I am working in yet, or like good enough at them that I don't want to stray too far. But I'm working with a friend of mine named Phil Woolham on, I guess, sculptures. He works on, he makes mascots. He used to have a job making mascots for a living, and we're doing some sort of life-sized mascot-y versions of some of my characters. So I'm excited to collaborate with him. And I'm working with a game designer, Merritt Kopis, on a small video game, a Twine-based sort of text adventure type game, I guess. And she's excellent. Her work is amazing, so I'm excited about that as well. And those are both mediums that I don't have any experience in. Well, it's funny. I guess it's funny you say that. Me and a friend this month. A collaborator, Ryan Sands, who I've worked with on a few things. We just posted artwork from a TV show pitch we sort of went through the process of this year that we ultimately didn't get. But aside from that, it's like that was a really unique case of something where like we did need the funding to make a TV show. Like we couldn't do that on our own. But generally, everything I do is like really cheap. So if I want to do something, I'm lucky enough that I can just do it. Yeah, like I said, publishing a mini comic is very inexpensive, and both Koyama Press and John and Quarterly are pretty patient about whatever like nonsense ideas I throw at them, which I'm very lucky to have been publishers. And yeah, everything else I do is like I've been doing these we were talking about the drawings for a show earlier, and I've just been doing them on like really cheap craft paper, and that's, yeah, I've tended to always work on the cheap, so I've been lucky about that.